I was 52 years old when I finally understood what my father meant when he said, "You'll see." I hated that phrase my entire life. Now I use it myself. But by the time I understood, he'd been dead for 7 years, and I never got to tell him he was right. Some truths arrive too late to change anything. This is mine. When I was 27, I took a job I didn't want because the salary was impossible to refuse. The position was at a consulting firm in Manhattan, corner office trajectory, the kind of opportunity people congratulated you for. My girlfriend at the time, Sarah, asked me if it was what I really wanted to do. I remember the exact way she asked it, quietly, while washing dishes, not looking at me, like she already knew the answer and was giving me one last chance to be honest. I told her it was a smart move, strategic, that we could buy a house sooner, that I'd transition into something I actually cared about once I'd built up savings. I told her all of this while avoiding her eyes. She dried her hands on a towel and nodded. She didn't argue. That should have been the first sign. The job was exactly what I expected. Long hours, meaningless projects, clients who treated you like an expensive appliance. I told myself it was temporary. 6 months became a year. A year became 3. Somewhere in there, Sarah and I stopped talking about the future and started managing the present. We bought the house. We filled it with furniture. We hosted dinner parties where I told stories about work that made people laugh, and I started to believe that meant I was happy. I wasn't happy, but I was busy. And busy feels like purpose when you're not paying attention. By the time I was 34, I'd been promoted twice. My salary had tripled. I had a retirement account that made financial advisors nod with approval. On paper, I was winning. In reality, I was a stranger living in my own skin. Sarah left on a Tuesday. I came home to find her suitcases by the door. She'd been crying, but she'd stopped by the time I arrived. That's how I knew she'd made up her mind days ago, maybe weeks. She said she couldn't watch me disappear anymore. Said I'd become someone who optimized everything and felt nothing. She said she'd tried to wait for me to come back to myself, but she didn't think I was coming back. I asked her to stay. I promised I'd change. I meant it in that moment, but we both knew I wouldn't, or couldn't. I'd built a life that required the person I'd become, not the person I used to be. She left. I stayed in the house, alone, surrounded by expensive furniture and a career I'd never wanted. Here's what nobody tells you about making the wrong choice. It doesn't announce itself. There's no dramatic moment where you realize you've gone down the wrong path. It's quieter than that, more gradual. You just wake up one day and notice that the person you see in the mirror isn't someone you recognize. And by then, you've built so much around that person, mortgage payments, reputation, expectations, identity, that changing course feels impossible. I stayed at that job for another 18 years. 18 years. Let that sink in. I made a choice at 27 that I knew was wrong, and I spent 2 decades living inside that choice because I was too afraid to admit I'd made a mistake, because I didn't want to disappoint people, because I didn't want to start over, because the salary kept increasing and walking away felt irresponsible. I told myself I was being practical, mature, responsible. I told myself that work wasn't supposed to be fulfilling. That was what hobbies were for. I told myself a lot of things. None of them were true. The truth was simpler and harder. I was afraid. Afraid of judgment. Afraid of failure. Afraid of being the guy who had a great opportunity and walked away from it. So I stayed. And every year I stayed, leaving became harder. My father died when I was 45. Heart attack. Sudden. He was there one day, gone the next. We'd had dinner the week before. He'd asked me if I was happy with my work. I'd given him the same rehearsed answer I'd given everyone for years. He'd looked at me the way Sarah used to, like he could see through it. But he didn't push. He just said, "You'll see." "I'll see what?" I wanted to ask. But I didn't. And now I can't. At his funeral, his best friend gave a eulogy. He talked about how my father had worked as an accountant for 30 years, even though he'd wanted to be a teacher. How he'd told himself he'd switch careers once he'd saved enough money. How that day never came. How he'd retired at 67 and died at 71, and in those 4 years of retirement, all he talked about was what he wished he'd done differently. I sat in that church and felt something crack open inside my chest. I didn't quit my job the next day, or the next month, or even that year. The realization that you've wasted your life doesn't come with an instruction manual. It comes with paralysis, with shame, with the crushing weight of all the time you can't get back. I was 50 when I finally left. Not because I'd found some grand purpose or moment of clarity. I left because I woke up one morning and understood with absolute certainty that if I stayed another year, I'd become my father. I'd retire with money in the bank and regret in my bones. And I'd spend whatever time I had left talking about what I should have done. I didn't have another career lined up. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending anymore. The first year after I quit was the hardest year of my life. I had no identity outside of that job. People asked me what I did, and I didn't know how to answer. I had money saved, but no direction. I'd spent so long being someone I wasn't that I'd forgotten who I actually was. Slowly, painfully slowly, I started to figure it out. I started writing, something I'd loved in college but abandoned because it wasn't practical. I volunteered at a youth center, teaching kids about financial literacy. Ironic, given I'd sold my own life for money. I traveled, not to tourist destinations, but to small towns where nobody knew me and I could exist without performance. And here's what I learned. The life I was afraid to lose by leaving wasn't a life I wanted anyway. I'd been protecting a prison, maintaining a performance. I'd spent 25 years building something I didn't value because I was too afraid to disappoint people I'd never see again. So let me tell you what took me 50 years to understand. And I need you to really hear this, not passively, not as background noise while you scroll. Actually hear it. You don't have as much time as you think you do. I know, you've heard that before. It sounds like a cliché. But I need you to understand what it actually means. It doesn't mean you're going to die young. It means that the decisions you're making right now, today, are compound interest. Every year you spend in the wrong job, the wrong relationship, the wrong city, the wrong life, it gets harder to leave. Not because it's actually harder, because you've built more around it. More obligations, more identity, more reasons why you can't change. You tell yourself you'll make the change later, when you have more money, when the timing is better, when you're more prepared. But later never comes. Later is a lie you tell yourself to avoid the discomfort of now. I'm not saying quit your job tomorrow. I'm not saying blow up your life on impulse. I'm saying be honest with yourself. Actually honest. Not the kind of honest where you acknowledge something is wrong and then do nothing about it. The kind of honest where you look at your life and ask, if nothing changed, would I be okay with this being it? Because that's the real question. Not what you hope your life will become, what it actually is right now. Here's another thing nobody tells you. The people you're trying to impress don't care as much as you think they do. They're too busy worrying about their own lives. Your parents, your friends, your colleagues, they'll have opinions about your choices. Some will be supportive, some won't. But in 5 years, they won't be thinking about your decisions. You will. You're the one who has to live inside the consequences. I stayed in a job I hated for 2 decades because I didn't want people to think I was irresponsible. Because I didn't want to be the guy who walked away from success. Because I cared more about their perception than my own experience. And you know what? When I finally quit, some people were confused, some were judgmental. Most just said, "Good for you," and moved on with their lives. Because my choices weren't the main character in their story. They were barely a side plot. But they were the entire story of my life. You think you're protecting yourself by playing it safe, by staying in situations that are good enough, by not rocking the boat. But safety is expensive. You pay for it with your time, with your energy, with the parts of yourself you have to shut down to stay comfortable. I know the counter-arguments. I've used them all. You have bills to pay, responsibilities, people depending on you. You can't just follow your passion like some naive 22-year-old. I get it. I'm not suggesting you abandon practicality. I'm suggesting you stop using practicality as an excuse to avoid difficult truths. There's a difference between being responsible and being afraid. And most of us have convinced ourselves that our fear is responsibility. I had a mortgage. I had expenses. I had a lifestyle I'd built around my income. And yes, leaving meant adjusting those things, downsizing, simplifying, making different choices. But it was possible. It was always possible. I just told myself it wasn't, because change was terrifying. The other thing I need you to understand, regret is heavier than discipline. So much heavier. When you're in your 20s and 30s, making the hard choice feels unbearable. Walking away from security, disappointing people, starting over, it feels like the worst possible option. So you choose the easier path, the one with less immediate discomfort. But that discomfort doesn't disappear. It accumulates. And by the time you're in your 40s and 50s, you're not just carrying the weight of the wrong choice. You're carrying all the years you spent making that choice, all the moments you can't get back, all the versions of yourself you never became. Discipline is hard in the moment. Regret is hard forever. I look back at my life, and I can pinpoint the exact moments where I chose comfort over truth, where I said yes when I meant no, where I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, where I performed instead of existed. And every single one of those moments feels heavier now than it did then. Not because I'm dramatic, not because I'm being harsh on myself, but because time gives you clarity. And clarity without the ability to change anything is a special kind of torture. There's a version of my life where I left that job at 30, where I had the difficult conversation with myself that I avoided, where I honored what I actually wanted instead of what I thought I should want. In that version, maybe I don't have the same house. Maybe my bank account looks different. Maybe some people judge me. Maybe things are harder in some ways. But in that version, I don't lose 25 years. I don't become a stranger to myself. I don't spend my 50s trying to remember who I was before I started pretending. You can't get time back. You can't unlive years. That's not how this works. Once it's gone, it's gone. And the older you get, the more acutely you feel that loss. So here's what I'm asking you to do. Not tomorrow, right now, today. Stop lying to yourself about what you want. Stop pretending that comfort is the same thing as happiness. Stop waiting for permission from people who aren't living your life. Look at the choices you're making. Actually look at them. The job you're in, the relationship you're maintaining, the city you're living in, the life you're building. And ask yourself, is this mine? Or is this what I think I'm supposed to want? Because there's a difference, a significant, life-altering difference. And you're the only one who knows the truth. If the answer is that you're living someone else's life, even partially, you have to do something about it. Not eventually, not when it's more convenient. Now, while you still have time, while the cost of change is still manageable. I'm not saying it will be easy. It won't be. Change is uncomfortable. It's uncertain. It requires courage and honesty and the willingness to disappoint people who expect you to stay the same. But the alternative is worse. So much worse. The alternative is waking up at 52 and realizing you've spent your entire adult life playing a role, maintaining a performance, building a beautiful prison and calling it success. I think about Sarah sometimes. I looked her up a few years ago. She's remarried, lives in Oregon, has 2 kids. She looks happy. Actually happy. Not the performed version I got so good at. I don't regret that she left. I regret that I made her feel like she had to. I regret that I chose a salary over a life. I regret that I was so afraid of being judged that I sacrificed the person I actually was. And I think about my father, about that last dinner we had, about how he looked at me when I gave him my rehearsed answer about work. He knew. He knew exactly what I was doing because he'd done the same thing. And he tried to warn me in the only way he knew how. You'll see. Well, I saw. I saw too late to tell him. Too late to make different choices. But not too late to tell you. You're going to die someday. I don't say that to be morbid. I say it because it's true. And we spend most of our lives pretending it isn't. We act like we have infinite time to course correct, to become who we're supposed to be, to start living authentically. But you don't have infinite time. Nobody does. You have right now. And what you do with right now compounds into the rest of your life. The question isn't whether you'll have regrets. Everyone has regrets. The question is, will your regrets be about the risks you took or the risks you didn't take? Will you regret trying and failing or never trying at all? I know which kind hurts more. I'm 56 now. I've been living the life I actually want for about 4 years. It's not perfect. It's not what I imagined when I was 27. But it's mine. Actually mine. And that difference between living a life you chose and living a life you defaulted into is everything. I can't get back the 25 years I lost. I can't undo the choices I made. I can't have the conversation with my father that I'll regret not having for the rest of my life. But you can. You still have time. Not infinite time, but time. Don't waste it pretending. Don't spend it building a life that looks good but feels empty. Don't sacrifice who you are for who you think you should be. Because one day, and it comes faster than you think, you'll be the older version of yourself looking back. And the only question that will matter is, did I live the life I wanted, or the life I was afraid to leave? You'll see.